Star Trek, The Next Generation, Starfleet Academy, Number 2, Line of Fire. Chapter 7. The Terran colonist, whose name was Kennelly, seemed ready to haul off and slug the Klingon colonist, whose name was Korm. "You're doing it deliberately." "Of course I'm doing it deliberately," snapped back Korm. "I enjoy it." You hear? You hear?" shouted Kennelly. Seated facing the two disputing parties were Trump, Worf, Kalar, Dini, and Card. "Yes, Mr. Kennelly, we hear," said Trump patiently. "This has been going on for weeks." "Do you think I have enjoyed it?" said Korm. "Do you think these weeks of your complaining has been a pleasant experience? How am I supposed to live my life? How am I supposed to get any sleep?" Gentlemen, said Trump, raising a hand. "Certainly some sort of accord can be reached." "There is tremendous significance to the music that I play," Korm informed him. "Yes, that's right, and the significance is that it's driving me crazy." "Gentlemen, please." Trump clapped his hands sharply, and he looked in exasperation to Dini. "Let me get this straight. Mr. Kennelly lives above Korm, and Korm's music has been keeping him awake at night, and you can't separate them?" "We don't have the room," said Dini. I assume, said Kalar, addressing Korm, "that you are a member of the Consar discipline." "You assume correctly," said Korm. When Dini looked in confusion at the two, Card explained, "The Consar discipline is a particular religious sect. They believe in making a joyous music to a particular muse, is the term you would use. The requirement is that it is made in the middle of the night, and the instrument of Korm's choice happens to be the Igum, which is somewhat similar to the earth instrument you call drums." "Terrific," wailed Kennelly. "Just terrific. He has to get religion at night, and he's doing it by pounding away on the drums." "Certainly a compromise can be reached," said Kalar, although she didn't look too hopeful. "Yes, it's very simple, a very simple compromise. He doesn't play his blasted music late at night so that I can get some sleep. Easy compromise, easy solution." "It is not that easy," said Card. But before he could continue, Worf said, "I do not understand the problem." Korm frowned. "I do not see why not. It is fairly simple. Our religion dictates that music be played at that time so our muse can be lulled to sleep." "By drums?" wailed Kennelly. "What next? Explosions?" "There is something that you have not allowed for, Korm," Worf told him. "Oh, really? And what might that be?" "By my calculations," Worf punched some quick numbers into a computer pad, "when you are playing in the middle of the night here, it is in fact early morning on our homeworld. You have not allowed for the time difference." Korm tried to come up with a reply to that, but nothing seemed to suggest itself immediately. He looked questioningly at Card, who shrugged. "But—" "There is no but," said Worf firmly. "I have made a thorough study of your religion. Consar inhabits the temples of the homeworld. Presuming that your music carries to her, and I am not disputing that it does, then you are in fact waking her up. You are doing her no favor at all." The others were looking at him in amazement. "The way I see it," Worf continued, "the only appropriate thing to do is to perform your music at the time corresponding to midnight on the homeworld, correct?" I suppose." Korm looked uncertain, which was certainly an improvement over indignant. "That being the case, I would recommend that you make your music at, let me see," and he punched in a few more calculations. "That would be 1400 hours, early afternoon. That would hardly serve as any sort of impediment to someone sleeping, I would think." Silent looks were exchanged at the table. "Korm," said Card cautiously, "does this seem equitable to you?" "I believe it does," said Korm, sounding rather surprised over the entire turn that matters had taken. "Mr. Kennelly?" Kennelly spread his hands wide. "No problems here." "Then that's that." Trump rose, shook Kennelly's hand, and nodded deferentially toward Korm. The two colonists walked out, looking at each other as if they were amazed that they weren't going to be fighting anymore.
"I admit," Card said slowly, "I am impressed, Mr. Trump. Mr. Worf, you handled that quite skillfully."
Kayla, in spite of herself, found herself nodding. She quickly stopped.
"I understand Klingons," Worf told him, "and I understand Terrans. Between the two, there is little I cannot grasp."
"Is that so?"
Card appeared to consider this a moment. Then he said,
"Mr. Trump, it is my opinion that we are not needed in these proceedings. I believe that Worf and Kayla should handle these matters."
There was a uniform chorus of "what?" from all concerned. Utterly unfazed, Card continued,
"Both of our groups are tired of looking at the two of us. Our effectiveness is somewhat limited in this situation, but word will spread quickly that Mr. Worf here handled the first of what will be many adjudicated disputes with relative ease. The Klingons will respect that, and the Terrans will respect that. I would like Kayla to remain to serve as a representative from the Klingon Empire. Other than that, however, I see no need for anyone else in this room."
Deanie was actually nodding. Trump was stroking his chin thoughtfully. "I'm not certain I would agree with that," Kayla began, casting a quick look at Worf.
"I do not recall asking whether you agreed with it or not," said Card firmly. "Colonist I may be, Kayla, but I am your superior in rank and experience as well. I say how matters will proceed."
He turned away from her, indicating that their conversation was over.
"So, Deanie, Trump, are we agreed?"
"All right. I'll give it a go," said Trump.
"Professor,"
Worf was clearly stunned.
"do you think that is wise?"
What's wrong, Mr. Worf?" asked Trump. "Are you telling me that you feel yourself incapable of handling this assignment?"
"No," said Worf quickly. "I can deal with whatever situation I'm given. It is simply that—"
"Simply that what?"
His face was a question mark.
"Nothing,"
said Worf, his voice dropping to a low growl.
"Good. Paul?"
Deanie nodded. "All right. I'm not sure it's what I would have come up with myself, but if you two are certain—"
"Good."
Trump thudded his hands on the tabletop and said,
"It's settled then. Gentlemen?"
The others rose as well, and they headed for the door.
"Professor," called Worf, "how long will we be required to be in charge of these proceedings?"
Trump turned to face him and spread his hands wide.
"Why, until they're done, Mr. Worf."
We've had a large number of petty arguments, squabbles, and fights in the past week," Deanie said. "Attempts by Card and myself to smooth things out have been less effective than they could have been."
"Futile is what they have been," Card told him bluntly. "Obviously, what was needed were some new faces. With any luck, we will have this colony a smoothly running enterprise in a week or two."
"I had scheduled far more time for Kennelly and Corm," said Deanie. "Since you handled them so quickly, it will take me a few minutes to summon the next case. So you two relax for a few minutes, and then we'll have the next petitioners for righteous actions brought before you."
"Good job, Mr. Worf," said Trump. "You are doing Starfleet proud."
And the three of them walked out of the room, leaving Worf alone with Kayla. "Steady, Zach. That's good. Now lower it in gently." The Brickar was staggering slightly under the weight of his load, which happened to be a massive pulse generator the size of a boulder. Several of the colonists, both Terran and Klingon, were nodding approvingly and making no effort to hide how impressed they were. Tanya, who was facing Zach, had been moving backward. Now she had stopped, though, and her hands were mirroring Zach's careful labors. "Slowly," she said, "very slowly. We don't want to botch this up, Zach. This place powers everything from food processors to planetary defenses." Zach allowed a brief grunt to escape his lips, but other than that, he did not acknowledge in any way the weight of the component he was carrying. The Starfleet Academy cadets went inside the main power source building, where the crystal-driven generators that supplied the colony with its energy were stored. The generators were not especially state-of-the-art, but they got the job done. They were older, backup generators as well, stationed in a relatively small shack just outside the main supply plant. The hope, however, was that there would be no need to use them. The large equipment that Zack was handling thumped squarely back into place. Only then did Zack let out a sigh, giving the slightest hint of just how much of a strain the thing had been on him.
Out of curiosity, he grunted, wasn't there any way that you could have repaired this thing while it was still in its receptacle? Did I have to move the entire thing?
It was the only way to get at the connectors, she said. That's why they kept having fluctuations in the energy flow, because the original connectors were faulty. One of the Terran colonists on the tech crew stepped forward. So this means we don't have to worry about those spot blackouts anymore. Right, said Tanya. What was happening was that you're managing to compensate for the outages by rerouting through other systems. But it was always temporary patches, and whenever you had the slightest overload, you'd blow out again. This beast, and she looked at the generator ruefully, is not the greatest design. It's a powerful package, but not all the parts are as accessible as they should be. The couplings are designed to last for at least 20 years, but these were faulty and wore out in no time. Now, lifting out the processor is fairly easy if you have anti-grav lifts.
Which we do not, acknowledged one of the Klingons, since they didn't seem particularly necessary.
Tanya turned to the tech crew. All right, fire her up. Let's see what we've got. Several colonists headed over to the array of control panels that lined a nearby wall. They worked quickly and efficiently, which Tanya was quite pleased to see. When she had first arrived to work with them on improving energy consumption, she had encountered bickering and hostility. The Klingon and Terran colonists seemed interested not so much in repairing what had gone wrong as assigning blame to someone for why something had gone wrong. It was not terribly constructive. Both groups had indulged in the unproductive pastime and had even accused each other of mucking with the systems deliberately for some unknown purpose. What had prevented the situation from overloading was, quite simply, that neither group knew why the other would be interested in sabotaging the colony generators. The fact was, as Tanya discovered, that no one had been mucking with anything. It was all normal equipment problems. Tanya's brisk analysis of the situation and deft handling of repairs, aided and abetted by the might of Zack Kebern, had all of the colonists nodding their approval. At that moment, Gower and Kodash walked in. Gower loudly announced, "All right, who is in charge here?" The respective tech heads of the Klingon and Terran group stepped forward. Gower nodded and said,
"We understand there has been some problems with power regulation. We are here to inspect it and help where we—"
"Not necessary," said Zack, unable to keep the smugness out of his voice. "It's already been attended to." This prompted nothing but the deepest scowl possible from the two Klingons.
"What do you mean, Brickar?"
demanded Kodash. Zack's face darkened and he took a step forward. Sensing possible difficulties, Tanya moved in between Zack and the two Klingons. "He means," she said, "that since you were busy elsewhere in the compound, taking care of no doubt important matters, we completed repairs on the generators. That should not be a problem, right? After all, we're all here to get things done."
"Not that you could possibly have taken care of this, even if you'd been of a mind to," Zack said.
Tanya shot him an angry glance that seemed to shout, "Shut up, Zack." If he noticed it, he didn't indicate it.
"What is that supposed to mean?"
demanded Kodash. His fists seemed to be flexing and tightening. Zack started to reply, but then he caught Tanya's expression. He saw the anger in her face, and he abruptly realized that he was sliding back into old habits. When he had first met Worf, he had taken every opportunity to bait him and provoke him. His deeply rooted prejudices against Klingons had come close to getting him kicked out of the academy. Fortunately for all concerned, and most especially himself, his time spent with Worf had made him realize that generalizing about any species as a whole was an inappropriate and ultimately ill-serving attitude to have. He had managed, over time, to overcome that anti-Klingon bias. Now he was simply going to have to get used to the notion of treating all Klingons with some measure of respect, even those he hadn't roomed with. All this went through his mind in a few moments, and he framed a reply in his mind that would be polite to the Klingon emissaries. Unfortunately, however, it was too late. Kodash had a reputation for being quick to anger, a reputation with which Zack was not familiar.
Anything that you could accomplish, Starfleet man, is something that we could do as well, said Kodash angrily. The superior attitude of the Brickar is almost as well known as the superior attitude of Starfleet itself.
The heads of the colonists were swinging back and forth as if they were watching a brisk tennis match. Zack bristled, finding it more and more difficult to rein himself in. Listen, I'm trying to be polite to you.
Really?
Gower contributed from behind the more powerful Kodash.
I would hate to see you in action if you were trying to insult us.
Gentlemen, please, Tanya said, trying to grab command of the situation. Although Tanya was capable of wielding some measure of authority when circumstances were stable, calming a Klingon and Brickar down when they were this angry was simply beyond her abilities to do.
You do not want me angry at you, said Zack dangerously. Ask any of the individuals here. They have seen what I can do. They have seen my strength.
Strength is not everything, scoffed Kodash. There's speed, agility, talent, and, most of all, intelligence.
Oh, really? Tanya put a hand on Zack's arm and said in a low voice, Zack, let it go. But he shook it off and continued dangerously. If intelligence is such an important factor, then where do you fit in? Kodash seemed to shake in place, his fist balled up and poised just over his belt buckle, and then he charged at Zack. Zack smiled, bracing himself, confident. He made no serious effort to block the Klingon's first punch, which he assumed would not hurt him at all. He assumed incorrectly, however. From his belt buckle, Kodash had pulled a palm-sized neural stunner, and when his flat-handed smack struck Zack's chest, the Brickar felt a massive charge throughout his body. His tough hide provided some protection, but not 100%. He staggered, trying to pull himself together. Kodash, his powerful legs driving him forward, slammed into Zack like a battering ram. Zack smashed backward through the door, and Kodash was right after him. Chapter 8.
So,
Worf said after a moment that seemed to hang forever in the air.
You are Kaler.
And you're Worf, son of Moog.
Yes.
So. She drummed her fingers on the conference table. What is the son of a Klingon doing among sons of humans?
My duty,
he replied crisply. As are we all, she acknowledged. But where does your duty lie? That, to me, is an important question.
That should be obvious.
It isn't. Tell me, Worf, how did you come to be among these humans? She was looking at him with great interest, but there was still something about her that made Worf uncomfortable. Was she asking because she was interested for herself? Or was she pumping him for information for some reason? Ultimately, he decided it made no difference. He had nothing to hide.
My family was part of the research outpost on Kittimer.
Historic Kittimer, she said, understanding. The site of the Great Peace Treaty of 2293, and the site of a major Romulan attack in 2346.
You're quite conversant in history.
It's always been an interest of mine. She studied him. So you were there during the attack?
Yes, I was much younger then.
Obviously, she thought a moment. My readings of the tragedy had always indicated that there were few survivors. You were one of the lucky ones then.
All things considered, I did not feel very lucky at the time. I was saved by a Starfleet officer, a human named Sergei Ryzhenko. He brought me to live on the farm world of Galt and eventually to Earth. He and his wife raised me as their own.
except that you do not identify yourself as Worf, son of Sergei Rozhenko, do you?"
"One cannot forget one's heritage,"
he replied. "No, one cannot. That is why I am curious as to your allegiances. You were raised as a human, but you are quite obviously Klingon. So where are your priorities? Are you true to humans or Klingons?"
"I am true to myself," he replied. "If there is only one of me, then that is acceptable. If there is never another Klingon in Starfleet, then that too is acceptable. What would be unacceptable is to be divided in my loyalties."
"You're saying that you would be willing to fight against Klingons on the side of the Federation." He looked at her curiously.
"Why should such a fight be necessary? We are allies now."
She stood and circled the room. "Worf, things change. Politics is a volatile discipline. We may all be friends and collaborators today, but we could be mortal enemies tomorrow. If you are hanging your peace of mind on the status quo, you could very easily find yourself in a more difficult situation than you ever anticipated. And what will you do then, Worf, son of Moog?" He was silent for a moment. Then he said,
"I will do what is right. I do not think that more could be expected from anyone."
She was about to reply when suddenly they heard a commotion from outside. Worf, to his distress, recognized at least one of the voices clearly. Worf was on his feet and vaulted over the table, getting to the door ahead of Kalar. He charged out and was appalled, while unfortunately not surprised by what he saw. Zach and Kodash were struggling in the middle of the central square of the colony. Colonists were gathering, pointing and shouting, but no one was getting close to the combatants. It was understandable that the colonists were keeping their distance because the Klingon and Brickar clearly meant business. Kodash had a chokehold on Zach and once again applied the neural stunner to him. The Brickar twisted and writhed in Kodash's grip. Then he managed to get leverage, and he broke free, shoving Kodash away. Before Kodash could recover, Zach stepped forward quickly and slammed Kodash in the chest. Kodash went down, and Zach lunged toward him. The Klingon barely managed to get out of the way in time. The irony of the situation did not escape Worf. When he had first encountered Zach Kebron, the two of them had come to blows. They had been separated by Starfleet security guards before they tore off each other's heads. Now Worf found himself in the bizarre position of being peacemaker. He shoved his way in between the two of them, ignoring the sudden feeling that he was taking his life in his hands. Regardless, he had to bring this to an immediate end.
"Stop it!" he thundered. "Both of you!"
"This isn't your concern, Worf," said Zach. "Besides, he started it."
"Me?" retorted Kodash. "You are the one who—"
"I do not care who started it," snapped Worf. "All I know is that I am ending it. You will immediately cease hostilities."
"Or what?" sneered Kodash. "Or you will make me? I would like to see you try."
"I am sure that you would," said Worf, "but I am not going to."
"Are you afraid?" Kodash challenged him. "Has being part of Starfleet made you a coward?"
"You see," said Zach, "that's the kind of thing he was doing before." "No, it has not made me a coward," Worf told him, "nor has it made me a blustering fool."
"You call me a fool?"
snapped Kodash. But Kalar had now come up behind Worf. "You assumed that he was referring to you, Kodash," she said sharply. "And I wouldn't blame him if he had been. Now stand down." Kodash glared at her.
"If you had not been made leader of this mission—"
"But I was, Kodash, I was. Debate me all you wish, but I have the final authority. Stand down, I said. Is that clear?" It seemed as if Kodash was weighing his options. What were the opportunities for directly attacking Kalar, or Worf, or Zach for that matter, who had been the reason for this entire thing? Finally, he sighed loudly and angrily enough to get his thoughts across, and then he said,
"As you wish, Kalar.
And he tossed a significant glance at Worf.
Know my duty."
"Good for you,"
said Worf. The colonists, realizing that the show was over, began to drift away. Both Zack and Kodash moved away as well, although in different directions and not without tossing angry glances at each other. Tanya, who had followed the course of the fight, looked a bit apprehensive as she walked up to Worf. "You handled that perfectly," she told him.
How did it happen?
Demanded Worf. She told him quickly and concluded, "It was just a good thing that you were here, that's all." He was about to tell her that obviously she had done all that she could, but then he noticed the way that Kalar was watching him as if she were judging him. She was the leader of her group just as he was the leader of his, and he suddenly felt a great deal of pressure for no reason that he could understand. He scowled more darkly than Tanya had ever seen, which puzzled her. And then to her astonishment, he said,
You should not have let it happen, Tanya.
"Me?" She tried not to laugh. "How am I supposed to stop it? They would have stepped on me."
You are overseeing an engineering function. That makes it your responsibility. I suggest that, in the future, you make certain to keep a firmer hand on situations before they erupt into violence. Is that understood?
She studied him with a curious tilt of her head. "Oh, yes, sir, Mr. Worf. What could I have been thinking? In the future, Mr. Worf, I shall stay right on top of it, even if it might get me killed, because I wouldn't want to disappoint you, Mr. Worf. Sir." She turned on her heel and walked off. He sensed rather than saw Kalar nodding behind him. "You're absolutely right, Worf. She handled that entire situation poorly. She can't let people under her command get out of control that way. If we do not have control, if we do not have discipline, then we have nothing. Don't you agree?"
Of course,
he said with difficulty. She paused a moment and then asked, "Do you have any intention of reporting her to your superiors?"
No, I do not think that is necessary.
"She was rather insubordinate, if you ask me." He turned to face her and said pointedly,
I did not ask you. Come, the next people seeking adjudication should be along shortly. We should not be late.
He headed back into the building with a curious and silent Kalar behind him.